The scent of my own blood filled the air as Raymond Kim's fangs pierced my throat. But instead of pain, warmth flooded through me. His ancient eyes, now glowing silver in the moonlight streaming through the penthouse windows, met mine as he pulled back. Around us, the bodies of three rival vampires lay motionless on the marble floor, their attempt to claim me as their prize ending in their destruction. 6 months ago, I never could have imagined this moment. 6 months ago, I was Barbara Patel, 24 years old, sleeping in my beat-up Honda Civic because I couldn't afford rent after losing my job at the diner. I was nobody special, just another human struggling to survive in a world that seemed determined to crush me. Now, as Raymond's blood bond pulsed through my veins, I understood that everything had changed the night I stumbled into his world. It started with the worst day of my life becoming something else entirely. I had been running from my ex-boyfriend, Jose, who had found me despite my attempts to disappear. 3 restraining orders meant nothing to a man who believed I belonged to him. That December night, with snow falling heavy and my breath forming clouds in the freezing air, I was barefoot because I had kicked off my heels to run faster through the downtown streets. The parking garage seemed like salvation, a place to hide until Jose gave up searching. My feet were numb against the concrete, my thin waitress uniform offering no protection against the bitter cold. I pressed myself behind a pillar, listening for footsteps, when I heard something else entirely. A sound like silk tearing, followed by a wet thud. Curiosity killed the cat, but it also changed my life forever. I peered around the concrete barrier and saw him for the first time. Raymond Kim stood over what had once been a man, though now it was something else. Something drained and broken. Raymond's dark hair was perfectly styled despite whatever violence had just occurred. His expensive suit unmarred by the blood that should have stained it. When he turned, sensing my presence with inhuman awareness, his eyes were no longer brown but glowing red. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but my feet wouldn't move. Maybe it was the cold numbing my reflexes, or maybe it was something else, something about the way he looked at me. Not like prey exactly, but like something precious he hadn't expected to find. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. He moved faster than physics should allow, appearing before me in a blink. Up close, I could see that his skin had an otherworldly pallor, like marble given life. When he spoke, his voice carried an accent I couldn't place, something old and refined. You shouldn't be here, little one. I wanted to speak, to explain about Jose, about running, about having nowhere else to go. Instead, I just stood there shivering, acutely aware that my life had just taken a turn into something impossible. That's when Jose's voice echoed through the garage. Barbara, I know you're in here, baby. Just come out and we can talk. Raymond's head tilted slightly, those unnatural eyes studying my face. I saw the moment he understood, the way his expression shifted from mild annoyance to something darker, something protective. Is he the reason you're running barefoot through winter? His voice was soft, but I heard steel underneath. I nodded, not trusting my voice. And you have nowhere to go. Another nod. Jose's footsteps were getting closer, his voice taking on that edge I knew meant violence was coming. I can hear you breathing, Barbara. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Raymond stepped closer, close enough that I should have felt warmth from his body, but instead felt only cold. He shrugged out of his long black coat, a garment that probably cost more than I made in 6 months, and wrapped it around my shoulders. The silk lining was impossibly warm, as if it held its own source of heat. You'll never feel cold again, he said, and something in his tone made it sound like a promise rather than simple comfort. I can offer you protection, Raymond continued, his voice pitched low enough that only I could hear. Safety from him, from anyone who would harm you. But it comes with a price. Jose rounded the corner then, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. He was a big man, used to intimidating people, but when he saw Raymond standing beside me, something in his expression flickered. Maybe it was the way Raymond held himself, perfectly still but somehow radiating danger. Maybe it was the expensive clothes that screamed wealth and power. Or maybe on some primitive level, Jose sensed what Raymond truly was. This doesn't concern you, man, Jose said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Barbara and I are just having a conversation. Raymond smiled and I caught a glimpse of elongated canines. I'm afraid Miss Patel is under my protection now. The way he said my name, with that formal precision, made it sound important, like I was someone worth protecting. Jose took a step forward, his hands clenching into fists. She's mine. No, Raymond said simply. She isn't. What happened next lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but I'll remember it for the rest of my life. Jose lunged forward, his fist aimed at Raymond's face. Raymond moved like liquid shadow, catching Jose's wrist and twisting with casual efficiency. The sound of bones breaking echoed through the garage, followed by Jose's scream. Leave, Raymond said, releasing him. If I see you near her again, I won't be so merciful. Jose stumbled backward, cradling his broken wrist, his face pale with shock and pain. He looked at me one last time, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Fear of what I'd aligned myself with. After Jose fled, Raymond turned back to me. The offer stands. Protection, safety, a place in my world. But once you accept, there's no going back to your old life. I thought about my old life. Sleeping in my car, working double shifts for barely enough to survive, constantly looking over my shoulder for Jose or the next man who thought he owned me. What exactly was I going back to? What's the price? I asked. His smile was enigmatic. You'll belong to me, completely. My mark, my protection, my world, but also my responsibility. I don't make this offer lightly. Looking back now, I understand what he was really asking. Not for a servant or a victim, but for a partner. Someone willing to step into the darkness with him. I pulled his coat tighter around myself, feeling that impossible warmth seep into my bones. What are you? Very old, very dangerous, and surprisingly lonely. His honesty was disarming. I'm what humans call a vampire, though we prefer other terms. I'm also the territorial lord of this city, which means I have enemies who would use you against me if they knew what you meant to me. What I mean to you? The words came out as a whisper. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see flecks of gold in those impossible red eyes. I've lived for 800 years, Barbara. In all that time, I've never met a human who looked at me without fear or greed. You looked at me like you were seeing a person. I realized he was right. Despite the blood, despite the inhuman speed and strength, despite everything that should have terrified me, I had looked at him and seen loneliness that matched my own. If I say yes, what happens? You come with me. Tonight. I mark you as mine, which will protect you from other vampires and give us a connection that allows me to sense if you're in danger. You live in my world, learn our ways, and in return, you'll never want for anything again. The practical part of my mind cataloged everything wrong with this scenario. Vampires weren't supposed to exist. I was contemplating binding myself to a creature who had just killed someone with his bare hands. I was making life-altering decisions while in shock and freezing to death. The rest of me, the part that was tired of being afraid, tired of being powerless, tired of surviving instead of living, whispered that maybe this was exactly what I needed. Yes, I said. Raymond's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of the tallest building in the city, accessible only by a private elevator that required both a key card and biometric scan. As we rose through the floors, I caught glimpses of my reflection in the polished steel doors. Raymond's coat dwarfed my small frame, making me look like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. My dark hair was tangled from running, my brown eyes wide with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Second thoughts? Raymond asked, noting my expression. Saw third and fourth thoughts, I admitted. But I'm still here. He smiled, and this time I saw genuine warmth instead of predatory amusement. Honesty, I appreciate that. The elevator opened directly into his living space, and I stepped into a world I'd only seen in magazines. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights below. The furniture was a mixture of modern luxury and antique pieces that looked like they belonged in a museum. Everything was done in shades of black, silver, and deep blue, creating an atmosphere that was both elegant and slightly otherworldly. "Welcome to your new home," Raymond said, watching my reaction. I walked to the windows, looking down at the city where I'd spent my life struggling. From this height, it looked different, smaller, like a problem that could be solved rather than an insurmountable challenge. "How does this work?" I asked. The marking, I mean. It's not what you're probably imagining, he said, moving to stand beside me. No dramatic neck biting or blood rituals. It's more intimate than that. He extended his hand, palm up. In the center was a small silver pendant on a delicate chain. The pendant itself was unusual, shaped like a stylized moon with intricate engravings that seemed to shift in the light. This has been in my line for centuries. When you wear it, other vampires will know you're under my protection. More importantly, it creates a connection between us. I'll be able to sense your emotions, your location, whether you're in danger. I picked up the pendant, surprised by how warm it felt. What can I sense about you? That depends on how strong our bond becomes. Initially, probably just my general mood and location. Over time, he shrugged. We'll discover that together. The chain was long enough that the pendant would rest just above my heart. As I fastened it around my neck, I felt a strange tingling sensation, like a mild electric current running through my body. There, Raymond said softly. Now you're mine, and I'm yours. The words should have felt possessive, controlling. Instead, they felt like a promise of mutual protection. Over the following weeks, I learned about Raymond's world in careful increments. He was indeed the territorial lord of the city, which meant he controlled vampire activity within a 100-mile radius. Other vampires required his permission to hunt, to establish businesses, to bring humans into their world. It was a position of enormous power, but also enormous responsibility. He showed me the hidden vampire establishments, the exclusive club on Fifth Street where vampires gathered to socialize, looking like beautiful, pale humans until you noticed they cast no reflections in the mirrors behind the bar. The underground court where disputes were settled with formal duels that were both elegant and terrifying. The network of safe houses and businesses that allowed vampires to exist alongside humans without detection. How many of you are there? I asked one evening as we walked through the Vampire Quarter, a section of downtown that looked normal during the day but transformed after dark. In this territory, about 300, worldwide. He shrugged. Perhaps 50,000. We're not as numerous as fiction suggests. I was learning to read his moods through the pendant. Right now, it pulsed with a mixture of pride and concern. Pride in his domain, concern about something he wasn't telling me. What's wrong? I asked. He stopped walking, turning to study my face. You're getting better at reading the bond. You're avoiding the question. There are some vampires who don't approve of my choice to mark a human. They see it as weakness, or worse, as a betrayal of our nature. What kind of disapproval are we talking about? Strongly worded letters, or something more direct? His smile was grim. More direct. There's a faction led by my brother Kyle who believes humans should remain food, not family. He's been building support for a challenge to my leadership. This was the first time Raymond had mentioned having a brother, and the pendant immediately conveyed his complex emotions about Kyle. Love, disappointment, anger, and underneath it all, a deep sadness. How long since you've seen him? 200 years, give or take a decade. We had a disagreement about the direction our kind should take. I believed we needed to adapt, to find ways to coexist with the changing human world. Kyle believed we should rule it. We continued walking, but I could feel tension radiating through the bond. Other vampires we passed offered respectful nods to Raymond, but I caught some of them studying me with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. He's coming here, isn't he? I said. That's why you're worried. The winter solstice is in 3 weeks. It's traditional for territorial lords to hold court, to hear challenges and settle disputes. Kyle has requested an audience. To challenge your leadership? To challenge my right to mark a human. In our law, if he can prove that my judgment has been compromised by attachment to a human, he can claim leadership of the territory. I stopped walking. So this is about me. Raymond turned, his hands settling on my shoulders. Even through his gloves, I could feel the coolness of his touch. This is about power, Barbara. It always is. You're just the excuse. But I could feel through the pain that it was more complicated than that. Kyle genuinely believed that Raymond's feelings for me made him weak, made him unsuitable to lead their kind. And part of Raymond worried that Kyle might be right. That night I lay in the guest bedroom Raymond had given me, staring at the ceiling and trying to process everything I'd learned. The pendant rested warm against my chest, carrying a steady pulse of Raymond's emotions from wherever he was in the penthouse. Contentment mixed with worry, affection mixed with fear. I was beginning to understand that my presence in his life had consequences beyond what either of us had anticipated. By marking me, Raymond had made a statement about what he believed vampires could become. By accepting his protection, I had become a symbol in a conflict that had been brewing for centuries. 3 days later, Kyle Collins arrived in the city. I felt Raymond's reaction to his brother's presence like a physical blow through the pendant. Standing in Raymond's study, I watched him read the formal challenge that had been delivered by messenger. "What does it say?" I asked. "Kyle challenges my fitness to rule on the grounds that I've allowed human attachment to compromise my judgment. The challenge will be settled by combat during the Solstice Court, with the winner taking control of the territory." Combat? The word came out sharper than I intended. Raymond looked up from the parchment, his expression carefully neutral. "Vampires settle disputes the way we always have. The strongest leads. What happens to me if Kyle wins?" The pause before Raymond answered told me everything I needed to know. Kyle believes humans are food, not family. That evening, Kyle requested a meeting. Raymond agreed but insisted it take place at the penthouse on his territory. I was instructed to stay in my room, but the pendant allowed me to sense the emotional undercurrents of their conversation even from a distance. Kyle Collins looked like a darker mirror of Raymond. Where Raymond was elegant and controlled, Kyle was sharp and predatory. His pale hair was slicked back, his clothes expensive, but somehow menacing. When he smiled, which he did often, it never reached his ice blue eyes. "Brother," Kyle said, settling into one of Raymond's antique chairs like he owned it. "You look well. Domesticity suits you." "Kyle." Raymond's voice was carefully neutral. "It's been a long time. Too long. I've missed our conversations about the future of our kind." Kyle's gaze moved around the penthouse, taking in the human touches I'd added over the weeks. Books I'd been reading, a coffee mug I'd left on a side table, a throw blanket that carried my scent. "I see you've made some changes. I've adapted. You've weakened." Kyle leaned forward, his expression becoming serious. "Raymond, I understand the appeal. Humans can be fascinating traits, but marking one, giving it a place in our world. You've crossed a line that endangers us all." Through the pendant, I felt Raymond's anger spike. "Barbara is not a pet." "No." Kyle smiled that cold smile again. "She's a weakness, and weaknesses in leaders get people killed." "Is that a threat?" "It's an observation. How many of our kind have you put at risk for the sake of one human's feelings? How many human lives have been lost because you're too distracted to maintain proper control over the territory?" I felt Raymond's shock through the bond. "What are you talking about?" Kyle pulled out a tablet, swiping through what looked like news articles. 3 unsanctioned feedings in the past month. 2 exposure incidents that required memory modification of witnesses. A rogue vampire who established a hunting ground in the university district and operated for 2 weeks before you noticed. The pendant conveyed Raymond's growing horror as Kyle continued listing security failures. Things that should have been caught immediately, problems that could have exposed their entire community. "You've been distracted, brother. Playing house with your human while your territory falls apart around you. These incidents could have been prevented if you'd been paying attention to your responsibilities instead of teaching a human how to live in our world." Kyle stood, smoothing down his suit jacket. "I take no pleasure in this challenge, Raymond, but I won't watch you destroy everything our family built for the sake of a human who will be dead in 60 years anyway." After Kyle left, I found Raymond standing at the windows, staring out at the city lights. The pendant was broadcasting a mixture of emotions so complex I couldn't separate them. Anger, guilt, fear, determination. "He's not wrong," Raymond said without turning around. "About what?" "I have been distracted. There have been problems I should have caught, situations I should have handled." I moved to stand beside him. "You've been teaching me about your world. That's not the same as neglecting your responsibilities, isn't it?" He turned to look at me, and I saw centuries of loneliness in his expression. "For 800 years, I've put duty first. The territory, the safety of my people, the preservation of our secrets. Everything else was secondary. And now? Now I find myself caring more about your happiness than the political implications of unsanctioned feedings in the warehouse district. The pendant pulsed with his conflicted emotions. Love and duty warring against each other. What if we found a way for you to do both? I asked. What if, instead of being a distraction, I could help you manage the territory? Raymond's expression shifted to something between surprise and hope. What do you mean? I mean, I've spent my whole life noticing things other people miss. I've had to survive. What if instead of you trying to balance teaching me and running the territory, I learned to help you run it? The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of intensive education. Raymond introduced me to his network of vampire allies and human contacts, teaching me to read the subtle signs that indicated problems in the territory. I learned to spot the difference between sanctioned vampire activity and rogue behavior. I studied the complex web of relationships that kept the supernatural world hidden from human authorities. Maria Richardson, Raymond's second-in-command, was initially skeptical of involving a human in vampire politics. She was a striking woman who had been turned during the Renaissance, with dark hair that she wore in an elaborate braided style and amber eyes that missed nothing. Teaching her our ways is one thing, Maria said during a meeting in Raymond's study, but involving her in territorial management is unprecedented. So was marking a human, Raymond replied. But precedent isn't always wisdom. I was learning to navigate the complex hierarchy of vampire society. Robert Robinson controlled the financial networks that allowed vampires to accumulate and maintain wealth across centuries. Hannah Martinez managed the safe houses and emergency protocols that protected vampires during crises. Jennifer Gomez oversaw the memory modification specialists who cleaned up exposure incidents. Each of them had initial reservations about accepting a human into their inner circle, but I was determined to prove my worth. I spent hours studying incident reports, learning to identify patterns that indicated potential problems. I accompanied Maria on territory inspections, watching how she assessed vampire establishments for compliance with Raymond's rules. "You're not what I expected," Hannah admitted, after a particularly long evening of reviewing security protocols. "Oh, most humans would have run screaming by now." "Most humans don't have my background," I replied. I've been surviving on the margins my whole life. This is just a different kind of survival." The pendant had grown stronger over the weeks, allowing me to sense not just Raymond's emotions, but sometimes his thoughts. During territorial meetings, I could feel his assessment of each situation, his weighing of risks and benefits. I began to anticipate his decisions, offering insights that complemented his centuries of experience. "You're thinking like a vampire," Maria observed one evening as we reviewed reports of unusual activity in the arts district. "I'm thinking like someone who understands what it means to be hunted," I corrected. "The skills transfer." 3 days before the solstice court, Kyle made his move. I was returning from a meeting with Jennifer about expanding the memory modification protocols when I felt Raymond's emotions spike through the pendant. Not anger or frustration, but pure ice-cold rage mixed with fear. I ran through the penthouse, following the Bond's pull to Raymond's private study. I found him standing over his desk, staring at a photograph that had been placed there in my absence. The photo showed Emma Brown, the elderly woman who had given me my first job when I aged out of foster care. She was sitting in her small apartment, unaware that she was being watched. On the back of the photo, someone had written a simple message: "The solstice court, come alone, or she dies." "Kyle," Raymond said, his voice barely controlled. Through the pendant, I felt his internal war. Rage at his brother for targeting an innocent human, fear for Emma's safety, guilt that his choices had put her in danger. "We have to get her," I said. "Wait." Raymond turned to look at me, his expression pained. "Barbara, this is exactly what Kyle wants. To prove that my attachment to you compromises my judgment. Then we prove him wrong. We save Emma and show that caring about humans makes you stronger, not weaker. Kyle has had 2 centuries to plan this. He'll have allies, resources, contingencies. Jishinyan, and you have me." I moved closer, placing my hand over the pendant. "You have someone who understands how humans think, how they hide, how they survive. Kyle sees humans as simple prey. That's his weakness." Raymond was quiet for a long moment, and I felt his emotions shift through the pendant. The fear and guilt remained, but they were joined by something else: determination. If we do this, he said slowly, we do it together. No heroic sacrifices, no splitting up to cover more ground. We go in as partners. Partners, I agreed. That night, we planned Emma's rescue with military precision. Maria provided intelligence on Kyle's known associates and safe houses. Robert arranged for financial resources and transportation. Hannah prepared emergency protocols in case we needed to disappear quickly. Kyle will expect you to come alone, Maria said, studying building schematics on Raymond's computer. He'll have the location heavily guarded, probably with vampires who owe him favors. How many? I asked. At least 6, possibly more. All older vampires with combat experience. I felt Raymond's concerns spike through the pendant. Barbara, you understand what we're walking into. These aren't humans you can outrun or outsmart. They're predators who've spent centuries perfecting the art of killing. Then it's a good thing I'm not going in as prey, I replied. I'm going in as your partner. The warehouse Kyle had chosen for his trap was in the old industrial district, surrounded by abandoned buildings and empty lots. As we approached in Raymond's car, I could feel his tension through the pendant, mixed with a predatory anticipation I was learning to associate with his vampire nature. Remember, Raymond said as we parked 2 blocks away, stay close to me. Don't try to engage any of them directly. Your job is to get to Emma while I handle Kyle. What if something goes wrong? He turned to look at me, his eyes already beginning to show flecks of red. Then you run. Promise me, Barbara. If this goes badly, you get Emma and you run. I promised, though we both knew I was lying. The warehouse was dark except for a single light in the center of the main floor. As we approached, I could see Emma sitting in a chair, apparently unharmed, but clearly terrified. Kyle stood beside her, his pale hair gleaming in the artificial light. Raymond, Kyle called out as we entered. And you brought the pet. How predictable. Let her go, Kyle. Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with what you've become. Kyle's voice echoed in the empty space. 800 years of evolution, and you've reduced yourself to a human's protector. I counted at least 8 other vampires positioned around the warehouse, all of them watching Raymond with predatory interest. Through the pendant, I felt his assessment of the situation. Too many enemies, not enough cover, civilians to protect. The challenge was supposed to be at the Solstice Court, Raymond said, moving slowly toward the center of the warehouse. This isn't the challenge, Kyle replied. This is an intervention, a chance for you to remember what you are. Kyle gestured and 2 of his allies moved toward Emma. I felt Raymond's protective instincts flare through the pendant, his vampire nature responding to the threat against someone under his protection. Choose, brother, Kyle continued. Save the old woman or save your pet. You can't do both. That's when I understood Kyle's real plan. This wasn't about proving Raymond was weak. It was about forcing him to choose between his human attachments, to demonstrate that caring about humans would always result in impossible choices and inevitable loss. But Kyle had made one crucial mistake. He had assumed I was helpless. I had spent weeks learning about vampire society, studying their strengths and weaknesses, understanding how they thought and fought. Kyle saw me as a distraction, a weakness to be exploited. He didn't see me as a threat, which is why he wasn't prepared when I activated the emergency beacon Jennifer had given me, flooding the warehouse with UV lights that had been secretly installed in the rafters. The lights weren't strong enough to kill the vampires, but they were enough to weaken them, to slow their supernatural speed and strength. In the chaos that followed, as Kyle's allies stumbled and hissed in pain, Raymond moved. What happened next was beautiful and terrible. Raymond fought like something out of legend, moving with fluid grace even as the UV lights sapped his strength. He was protecting Emma, protecting me, protecting the future we had built together. But Kyle was strong, older than most of Raymond's allies, and he had prepared for this confrontation. As the 2 brothers fought, I saw centuries of resentment and love and disappointment play out in violence. I got Emma free from her restraints, helping her toward the exit, but I couldn't leave Raymond to face Kyle alone. Not when I could feel his exhaustion through the pendant, his strength fading as the UV lights continued to burn. "Barbara, go!" Raymond shouted, even as Kyle's claws raked across his chest. Instead, I did something Kyle would never have expected from a human. I turned off the UV lights. In the sudden darkness, Raymond's strength returned in full. But more importantly, Kyle's allies, who had been struggling against the artificial daylight, were now free to act. Except they didn't attack Raymond. They attacked Kyle. "What?" Kyle stumbled backward, staring at his own people in confusion. "You made one mistake, brother," Raymond said, his voice carrying new authority. "You assumed loyalty could be bought with promises of power." Maria stepped out of the shadows, followed by Robert and Hannah. "We've been watching Kyle's recruitment efforts," Maria explained. "Every vampire he approached was already loyal to Raymond. We've been feeding him false intelligence for weeks." Kyle's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, understanding, and finally rage. "You turned my own people against me." "I didn't have to," Raymond replied. "You did that yourself, the moment you threatened an innocent human to make a point about vampire superiority." The fight that followed was brief but decisive. Kyle, alone and outnumbered, fought with desperate fury, but couldn't overcome the vampires who had pretended to support him. When it was over, Kyle knelt in the center of the warehouse, defeated but not destroyed. "What happens now?" I asked. Raymond looked at his brother with an expression of profound sadness. "Now Kyle chooses. He can accept my leadership and find a place in the territory under my rules, or he can leave and never return." Kyle raised his head, his ice-blue eyes meeting Raymond's. "You're making a mistake, brother. Humans will be the death of us all." "Maybe," Raymond said, "but isolation will definitely be the death of us. The world is changing, Kyle. We can change with it, or we can become extinct." Kyle stood slowly, his expensive suit torn and bloodied. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Raymond replied. "The challenge is settled. The territory remains mine." As Kyle and his remaining supporters left the warehouse, I felt a complex mix of emotions through the pendant: relief, sadness, determination, and underneath it all, a deep sense of rightness. "Is it really over?" I asked as we helped Emma to Raymond's car. The immediate threat, yes, but Kyle was right about one thing. The world is changing, and we're going to have to change with it. 6 months later, I stood in the penthouse that had become our home, watching the sun set over the city we protected together. The pendant around my neck pulsed with warmth, carrying Raymond's contentment as he finished his evening calls with the Territorial Council. Emma had recovered from her ordeal, though she now knew about the supernatural world that existed alongside the human one. She had chosen to accept memory modification to remove the traumatic details while keeping the knowledge that I was safe and protected. She visited every week, bringing homemade cookies and treating Raymond like the son-in-law he had essentially become. The vampire community had adapted to my presence more easily than anyone expected. My insights into human behavior had helped prevent 3 potential exposure incidents, and my ability to move freely in the human world had made me an invaluable liaison between the two communities. "The council meeting went well," Raymond said, joining me at the windows. "Oh, the other territorial lords are interested in implementing similar human liaison programs." "Change is spreading," I observed. "Slowly, but yes." He wrapped his arms around me from behind, and I leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady pulse of the bond between us. "Kyle sent word from the European territories. He's established himself in Romania, working with vampires who share his more traditional views. Are you worried about him?" "I'm sad for him," Raymond said after a moment. "He's choosing isolation over adaptation, but that's his choice to make." Through the windows, I could see the lights of the vampire quarter beginning to come alive as the sun disappeared completely. Our world, the world we had built together, was thriving. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked, marking me, bringing me into this life. Raymond was quiet for a long moment, and through the pendant, I felt him considering the question seriously. "I regret that it put you in danger. I regret that it caused conflict with Kyle, but regret marking you. Never. Even though I'm human, even though I'll age and die while you remain the same." "Barbara," he said, turning me in his arms so I could see his face, "you've changed everything about how I see the world. You've made me remember what it means to hope for the future instead of just surviving it. Whatever time we have together, whether it's 60 years or 600, it will be worth it. I reached up to touch his face, marveling at how the man who had once seemed like a beautiful monster now simply seemed like home. What if there was a way to have more time? His expression grew carefully neutral. What do you mean? I mean, I've been learning about your world for months now. I know that transformation is possible under the right circumstances. Barbara, his voice carried a warning. I'm not asking you to turn me, I said quickly. I'm asking if you would want to someday. When I'm ready, when we're both sure. Through the pendant, I felt his emotions in waves. Hope, fear, love, uncertainty. It's not a decision to make lightly, he said finally. Becoming a vampire means leaving humanity behind completely. It means watching the human world change while you remain apart from it. It means accepting that you'll outlive everyone you've ever known. Except you, except me. I thought about my old life, the life I had been living before that night in the parking garage. Struggling to survive, always afraid, always alone. Then I thought about the life I had now. Purpose, partnership, a place in a world that was larger and strange and more wonderful than I had ever imagined. I want to learn more about it, I said. Not to decide now, but to understand what the choice would mean. Raymond smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since Kyle's challenge. We have time to explore that question. All the time in the world. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text from Maria. Another territorial issue requiring our attention. Another problem to solve together. Duty calls, I said, showing Raymond the message. Our duty, he corrected. Ready to go save the world again? I looked around the penthouse one more time, at the life we had built together. 6 months ago, I had been barefoot in winter, running from a man who thought he owned me. Now I was standing in a warm home, protected by a man who saw me as an equal partner, preparing to go out into the night and make a difference in the world. I'm ready, I said. As we left the penthouse together, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. From victim to partner, from human to something more, from surviving to thriving. Raymond had wrapped me in his coat that first night and promised I would never feel cold again. He had kept that promise in ways I never could have imagined. The supernatural world was vast and complex, full of politics and danger and ancient conflicts. But it was also full of possibility, of the chance to build something better than what had come before. We stepped into the elevator, and I felt the familiar pulse of the pendant against my chest. Through it, I could sense Raymond's emotions. Contentment, determination, and underneath it all, hope for the future we were creating together. Where to first? I asked as the elevator descended toward the garage. The docks, reports of rogue vampire activity that needs investigation. Rogues or politics? With vampires, there's usually not much difference. I laughed and the sound echoed in the small space. 6 months ago, the idea of laughing about vampire politics would have seemed insane. Now it was just another night at the office. As we drove through the city streets, I watched the familiar landmarks pass by. The diner where I used to work, now closed for the night. The parking garage where my old life had ended and my new one had begun. The vampire quarter, where I had learned to navigate a world most humans never knew existed. Do you think Kyle was right about anything? I asked as we approached the warehouse district. Raymond considered the question. Kyle was right that change is dangerous, that caring about humans makes vampire society more vulnerable in some ways. But he was wrong about the solution. The answer isn't to retreat from the world, it's to engage with it more thoughtfully. And if other vampires disagree, then we'll deal with them the same way we dealt with Kyle. Together. The word carried weight, carrying all the promise and challenge of the life we had chosen. Together, we would face whatever came next. Together, we would continue building bridges between the human and vampire worlds. Together, we would prove that love could be a source of strength rather than weakness. As we pulled up to the warehouse where tonight's crisis was unfolding, I felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with stepping into danger. But underneath it was something new, something I had never felt in my old life. Confidence, purpose, The certainty that whatever we faced, we would face it as equals. Raymond turned off the engine and looked at me. Ready? I checked the pendant one more time, feeling the steady pulse of our bond. Always. We stepped out into the night together, and I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would meet them the same way we had met everything else. As partners, as equals, as two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed to become more than they ever could have been alone. The warehouse ahead was dark and quiet, but I could sense the supernatural energy radiating from within. Another crisis, another opportunity to prove that the world Raymond and I were building together was worth fighting for. I thought about that frightened woman who had run barefoot through winter streets 6 months ago, and I wished I could tell her what was waiting for her in that parking garage. Not just safety, not just protection, but transformation. The chance to become someone who mattered, someone who made a difference, someone who was truly and completely loved. Raymond had promised I would never feel cold again, and he had kept that promise in every way that mattered. Now, as we walked toward whatever danger waited in the darkness ahead, I made a promise of my own. I would never let fear make me small again. I would never accept less than I deserved, and I would never forget that sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the darkest places. The Vampire King had wrapped me in his cloak that first night, but what he had really given me was so much more. He had given me a place in the world, a purpose and a love that transcended the boundaries between human and monster. And that, I thought as we disappeared into the shadows together, was worth everything. But before I end this story, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in that parking garage? Would you have taken Raymond's offer, knowing the dangers that came with it? Have you ever had to choose between safety and freedom, between the known and the unknown? Drop a comment and let me know your thoughts. And if this story moved you, if it made you believe in the power of transformation and love, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. Because in a world full of monsters and magic, sometimes the most important thing is finding someone who sees you not as you are, but as you could become. The night is full of possibilities, and our story is just beginning.